Well, I want to read, I want to write, and I want to travel across India. Russia-Ukraine crisis, all of them we achieved success. And therefore, learning outcomes are critical for India. FDI policy doesn't work country by country. Growth with manufacturing, because that will create great, good quality jobs.
Good afternoon, Mr. Kant. Welcome to BS Manthan. I'll begin by asking you about your experience of G20 and, as G20 Sherpa, you were here a few months ago and you were able to get all the members on board for communique. How do you think that success will drive India to the 2047 dreams that we are dreaming?
So first of all, on the experience, it was very difficult. It was very complex. It was really complex because to bring consensus on all issues, and it's a multilateral forum, so without a consensus, nothing is achieved. The key is to be able to bring every single country on board. And India demonstrated its great ability to work across G7, all emerging markets, Russia, China, from issues of growth to sustainable development goals, to digital public infrastructure, to reform of the multilateral financial institutions, to digital public infrastructure, to women-led development, and lastly, the Russia-Ukraine crisis on which even the United Nations had not been able to achieve success. India demonstrated its ability to bring consensus across the board. And on all 83 paras, we were able to achieve 100% consensus.
Was there any moment at that time that you thought that we are not able to get consensus?
So at least 12 times I felt that we should give up. There is no possibility of a consensus because the Russia, there was the climate change issue, the energy transition issues were very complex. All our ministerials had not worked out. So finally I had to take the Sherpas about 80 kilometers away from Delhi. And we just locked them in and said that we negotiated on the Russia-Ukraine crisis for about 300, on one para for 300 hours. We did about 250 bilaterals and 16 rounds of negotiation, 16 drafts failed. But after every draft, within half an hour of that, we used to come out with a new draft. We never allowed failure to demoralize us. So 16 drafts, it was the 17th round that finally worked. And that is, we had brought all the developing and emerging markets together. It was a draft of all the emerging markets. We literally had to force everyone to say that this was the best draft that could ever be done, and that's how we achieved success. So it was a lot of touch and go, and but we achieved full consensus. And this is the first time that even the United Nations accepted that we've brought their agenda of SDG, of growth, of Russia-Ukraine crisis, all of them we achieved success in a manner which has never been achieved by any other multilateral body before.
Do you think that G20 success of India will help us in, achieving the developed country status by 2047? And if yes, how?
Well, I am a believer that what you achieve in the multilateral forum is a demonstration of your ability, your stature, your standing, which is what the Prime Minister, as the leader of G20, had. And without his stature and standing, it would not have been possible for India to achieve success. We could, as his Sherpa, I could take a lot of risk, a lot of courage, a lot of be aggressive because of his standing. And because of the stature the country has achieved under his leadership. And that's why we've pushed the limits to achieve success there. But to be a developed country, I think India needs to push its own agenda. And that agenda is about driving growth. And that agenda is about making the states grow at high rates in the coming years. That agenda is about growing on all four cylinders of driving manufacturing, driving sustainable urbanization, enhancing agriculture productivity, and also ensuring that your services sector grow. But I think in the coming years, as we aim to become a 30 trillion to $35 trillion economy by 2047, it's very, very important that we are able to create growth with manufacturing, because that will create great, good quality jobs. There are too many people dependent on agriculture. The percentage of population at about 40% dependency on agriculture is too high. No country in the world has. We need to take people away from agriculture into manufacturing. And we need to enhance productivity in agriculture. But we also need to become a great manufacturing nation, which would require us to build size and scale of manufacturing in a very big way. We need to do sustainable urbanization. And we are going to see 500 million people getting into the process of urbanization, which means that a huge challenge on sustainable urbanization is critical.
You mentioned manufacturing, which also includes Make in India. Make in India and you go a long way. Even your latest book is on Make in India. So do you think there is a cautionary note there in Make in India? Is it all good? Or is there anything adverse there which we should be conscious about and be careful about?
See, we should be, first of all, you can't do Make in India without getting size and scale of manufacturing. So you need to create 10,000 more large companies. We need to create many more Adanis and Ambanis and many large companies, 10,000, because they create their own ecosystem of tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 manufacturers, and there is a backward-forward linkage between large companies and smaller companies. And the second critical thing is that you must be an integral part of global value chains. Global value chain means that you must be able to import components at low cost and inputs at low cost to be able to produce at very globally competitive prices. And therefore, the tariffs on inputs have to be at zero level. And that is when your goods will become very, very competitive internationally. And that is how the global value chains work across the world. So size and scale of manufacturing is critical. Your ability to improve your logistics is very critical. Logistic costs have to fall even further. We've done a number of things by which logistic costs have come down. You know, this Gati Shakti, ULIP, all these are very good initiatives. Now the turnaround time at ports have improved, but I think logistic costs must fall even sharper. And thirdly, I think tariffs on inputs have to be at globally competitive rates.
On the policy front, do you think anything that has happened in the last 5 years or 10 years, it could have been done in a different way?
No, several things have been done in a very big way in the center, like scrapping a number of rules, regulation procedures, paperwork, scrapping 1,500 laws. Many things have been done by the center, the GST, the reduction on corporate tax, the IBC, the RERA. All these have been done by the central government. What we now need to push in the next 5 years is really make states the agent of transformation. I mean, what the center has done, now the states need to do. We need 10 champion states to grow at 10% plus. Without the states growing at 10%, the ambition should be to grow at, India must grow at 9 to 10% for 3-decade period. I mean, without India growing at 9 to 10% for 3-decade period, that is what Korea did, that's what Taiwan did, that's what China did, that's what Singapore did. From big to large countries have done it. India has also done it, but it's done it for a brief period of 5 years. We need to do it for 3.5 decades. And for that to happen, you need 10 to 11 champion states. Champion states who will drive India's economy by 10 to 11% growth for the next 3 decades. And you can't do it if only the south and the west are growing and the eastern part of India is not growing. You need Bihar, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, all to grow at high rates in the coming years. That's where reforms are required. All of them have to scrap their rules, regulation, procedures which they have built in the socialistic era.
All right, you've mentioned states, champions have to be there. Can you name 3 things that we need to do for India to reach that 2047 developed India level, and 3 things that we should not do?
Well, the 3 things which we should do is, one, to improve our Firstly, to improve our learning outcomes and our health outcomes. You're going to have, if you're going to provide by 2047, you're going to provide 25% of the skilled manpower to the world. And therefore, learning outcomes are critical for India. Skilling your manpower is critical for India. To my mind, that's the most important thing. Second thing is you can't grow at those high rates without being a manufacturing nation. It's not possible. No country in the world has grown at those high rates without being a manufacturing nation. And thirdly, to my mind, no country has grown without a sustainable urbanization. Our urbanization has been very unplanned and very unsustainable. So we must do urbanization, which should be manufacturing-led urbanization, in a very sustainable manner. And proper planning, back of public transportation, cities for cycling and walking, recycling of water, recycling of waste, all this is very critical. Otherwise, we'll create an India which is unplanned and unsustainable. These three are critical. And three things which we should not do. Firstly, we should ensure that we should be very predictable and consistent on our policies. Second thing is we must ensure that we do not act like we had done earlier, keep adding rules, regulation, procedure, nothing. We should go completely digital. There should be no human intervention. We should make sure that we are totally, every citizen of India should be able to get in touch with the government officials digitally. And thirdly, to my mind, it's very, very important that take the action to the states. Take the next bit of reforms, make the states become the champion of reforms. If the states grow at high rates, there's a huge difference between growing at 6%, there's a huge difference between growing at 8%, there's a huge difference between growing at 10%. There's a compounding power of growth is very, very enormous. If you are able to grow at 6%, you will take your per capita income by 2047 to 11,000, from 3,000 something to 11,000. If you grow at 8%, you will take it to 15,000. If you grow at 10%, you will take it to 25,000. So the compounding power of growth is huge. It's enormous. And therefore, our ambition should be that we should not rest content with 7% rate of growth. Our ambition should be 10% plus rate of growth.
Is there anything specifically we should do to create jobs that we have not done in the past 5 years or 10 years? Job has been sort of a...
See, I've been a long-term believer that two things. One is that if you grow large companies, you will create jobs because they have their own momentum of creating backward-forward integration with the MSME sector. When Maruti came in, there were no MSME sectors in the automobile sector. You created a number of tier 2, tier 3 producers. You created MSMEs. That's happened all over the world. So you need to create India has too few large companies. It has too many MSMEs and small sector companies. So enable companies to grow big. There's no crime in growing big. I think we should understand that if we have very large companies, we'll automatically have MSMEs and SMEs and micro companies which will create jobs for India. And second thing, jobs will come in if there's a lot of more disruption through startups. Startups create a vast number of jobs. They do a lot of disruption. So India is today the third largest startup country in the world. Our aim should be that by 2030, we should be #1 company in the startup world. We should be able to create an ecosystem where we are willing to take on Silicon Valley in terms of startup eco-culture. There's no reason why we should not be. We should allow a lot of private capital to flow into these companies. We should allow a huge amount of venture capital to flow into India. We should allow Indian insurance companies, Indian pension funds, Indian family houses are not investing in our startup ecosystem. They should all be investing into our startup ecosystem to make India the #1 ecosystem in the world.
You said there should be more Ambanis and Adanis in India. So
I said there should be more Ambanis, Adanis, there should be more Tatas, there should be more Marutis, there should be more large companies, not merely Adani, Ambani. That should not become your headline tomorrow. I said there should be 10,000 more large companies.
So is there any way to get more larger companies? Will the larger companies right now allow more companies to grow that large?
Why not? there, you see, there are so many areas of growth where, you know, the Indian mindset is all Indian companies look at the domestic market. They don't look at exports. And, you know, what the value you get in the export market is 5x of what you get in the domestic market. You look at Korea, look at China, look at China. None of these companies think of the domestic market. They only think of penetrating global markets. So the minute you think of the world as your market is not the 1.4 billion people of India. It's the 5 billion people of the world who are going to move from poverty to middle class. Indian companies should penetrate global markets. Whatever happens, India can never grow at 9 to 10% without exports. Every time India has grown, it's grown on the back of exports. Whenever exports have grown, India has grown for 5 to 6 years. So Indian companies' ambition should not be the domestic market alone. Why are Indian automobile companies not penetrating global markets? I mean, look at a company like BYD, electric cars, 18% of the global share. Tesla is only 12%. Look at CATL, controlling 80% of the battery manufacturing market in the world. Indian companies should be doing that. I mean, Tata Motors, Maruti's, Mahindra should be all capturing global markets, not Indian market alone.
You mentioned BYD also, and do you think, and you also talked about global value chain. So do you think we need to change anything, you know, on global FDI policy, country-wise FDI policy, especially related to China? Should there be a rethink?
No, FDI policy doesn't work country by country. You need to make things absolutely easy and simple across the board. You need to allow FDI across the sectors to come into India. And I think we need to make sure that we handhold every large company which has not come into India. We need to talk to them. We need to ensure people are looking for alternatives to China. No country is better poised than India to be able to do this. Secondly, we should ensure that these companies are handheld to success in the case of India. And India is a very large market, which you know, Vietnam is a small market. What many people try and compare India with Vietnam, that's only the Chinese companies which are relocating to Vietnam. But in the long run, India will be the market for the future. Now, it's important to understand that future investments may not go to China, but if you look at the top 20 US companies, 90% of their production is still vested in China. And therefore, the need is to start working with these companies individually to see what they need to get into India to do manufacturing here. Much like what has happened to Apple, much like what has happened to Samsung because of PLI. You need across the board, sector by sector, to see what they want to do, what they need to do, and handhold them into success in India on a scale.
Do you agree with Mr. Narayan Murthy's recipe for work, 70 hours a week? Is that fine, or should we be working less to become a developed country by 2047?
No. Mr. Narayan Murthy talked about 72 hours a week. During G20, we work 300 hours a week, number one. Number two, I don't believe in number of hours, I believe in outcomes. I am a clear believer that India must work with outcomes. That's what the Prime Minister made us do in Aspirational District Program. He defined the outcomes. That we have to improve learning outcome, we have to improve health outcomes. We said that these are the most backward districts of India. We are going to transform these 112 of the most backward districts on outcomes. Within 3.5 years, we were able to transform these districts out of sheer competition because we worked on outcomes. So it's not the number of hours you work in, but it's the outcomes that you deliver. And therefore, the country must be clear that we want to achieve certain outcomes for this country, and we'll achieve them by improving learning outcomes or health outcomes or enhancing agriculture productivity or increasing your manufacturing share as a percentage of GDP. It's got nothing to do with the number of hours you work. I have nothing against Mr. Narayan Murthy's statement, but that statement should be backed by outcomes.
Just going back to G20, as a Sherpa of G20, how are you carrying things forward from the New Delhi Leadership Summit?
So the Prime Minister is very clear that we need to deliver, not only that we get a G20 statement out, the hard work begins now. We need to work with all the countries to ensure that whatever India has achieved needs to get implemented. So we are working with all G20 countries, including all our ministries, to ensure that we are able to implement all the decisions that have been taken in G20. And we are constantly working with Brazil and South Africa, which are the countries succeeding. So we have to work on a day-to-day basis with both Brazil and South Africa to ensure that every single decision that India has taken, and we have taken 83 different paras, but we had about close to 230 different outcomes where consensus was reached. All those outcomes are fully implemented on ground.
Anything that you have in mind for yourself now? What's next for Mr. Amitabh Kant?
Well, I want to read, I want to write, and I want to travel across India. I want to rediscover myself.
Any thoughts on politics?
No, I'm not cut out for politics. You are asking the wrong man. You should be asking many other civil servants who are jumping into politics. I'm not cut out for it.
Can you summarize, say in brief, what should be the first few things that the next government should do, whether it is the current government or any other government? What are the top things that the government should do in terms of policy to make a real change?
So first of all, if India is to grow at high rates for 2047 to be a $30 trillion economy, the first and foremost thing is private sector investments must kick in. There is, the investment rate is about 31%. That has to go up to about 36%, 36%. And if you want to achieve a 10% growth, the investment rate has to go up to 40%, 39 to 40%. And that cannot happen on the back of government capex. I mean, government has reached a limit to its capital expenditure. The private sector, government has given away 1,45,000 crores to the private sector by rationalizing the corporate tax rate, with the intention that private sector, the country has never seen private balance sheet in such a good condition. The country has never seen bank balance sheet in such a good condition. The private debt to GDP ratio of the banks is very low at 56%. In other countries, it is 130, 128%. And therefore, there is huge scope for private sector to invest in India in the coming years. And that is what should really now kick in a big way to ensure sustained, continuous growth over a long period. And once that kicks in, you will have a decade-long growth on the back of private sector.
But how do you get that animal spirit out?
Animal spirit has started kicking in. You don't have to, business standards shouldn't worry too much about it. It's started kicking in. It'll kick in a very big way. And once it kicks in, the whole decade will be a growth driven by the private sector of India.
Do you expect that animal spirit to come only from the big guys, the Tatas, Ambanis, Adanis, or, others like startups you mentioned? They are like...
No, it will happen across the board. Once private animal spirit kicks in, it happens domestically, it happens through FDI, it happens through startup. There's a whole ecosystem which drives the mechanism of private sector kicking in. It's not dependent on government, it's not dependent on you. The government has been able to create a great ecosystem right now where the balance sheets are in great condition, the bank balance sheets are in great condition, there's ease of doing business, many other things, and I think once it takes off, it will take off in a very big way. We now need to just get the states to act and simplify themselves.
On startups, you've been a big supporter of startups and you've done so much. Is the regulatory environment right for startups, or should something change?
No, the regulatory mechanism is great for startups. There was one issue which the RBI has set right today. Between the today's RBI circular should be able to set that framework right of ability of Indian companies being able to invest into the startup movement if there are foreign venture funds wanting to do it. I have only one other suggestion, and that is we need a lot of more patient capital for deep tech. And for deep tech to happen, you need to create a fund of funds of a very big amount. And the government should do that, because that will then support, the fund of funds will then support a lot of other venture funds which will invest into startup, many other deep tech startup. So the next round of startup, a lot of startups have grown because India's digitization took place in a very big way. I mean, now the next round of startups has to be deep tech. It has to be in quantum computing. It has to be on clean energy. It has to be on AI, many other areas where you need a lot of more patient capital. And that would require a fund of funds to be created. And the third big thing on startup movement is that 78% of the money coming into the startup movement is still coming from foreign sources. So you need, Indian insurance companies are not investing in Indian startup movement. Indian pension funds are not investing in Indian startup movement. Indian family companies are not investing in Indian startup movement. I mean, without that happening, how will the Indian startup become the #1 in startup movement in the world?
How do you think that will change?
That will change because government must take the lead in ensuring that LIC invests into startup movement of India.
Okay.
Yeah, and IRDA must ask insurance companies to start up into startup. Some amounts, small amounts must be taken. These are risk capital, but they must be taken for developing the startup movement into India. In India, why should Indian money not find a way? I mean, is it necessary that all Indian money goes into opening institutes abroad and education? They must put money into Indian startup institutions.
You mentioned artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence will be seen in India in a big way across which all sectors? The top sectors.
There's no question of which sector. AI is a fundamental technology. Is a foundational technology. Without this, no sector will grow. You need AI in education, you need AI in agriculture, you need AI in health, you need AI in manufacturing. Every sector across the board will need data, will need machine learning, will need use of artificial intelligence. Without this, India cannot grow.
Another issue, apart from artificial intelligence, cryptocurrency. What are your thoughts on cryptocurrency?
So I'm against crypto as a currency, but crypto as an asset class, the value which we perceive in something. I think that crypto as an asset class is very different from crypto as a currency. And I'm against crypto as a currency, but crypto as an asset class is a question of the perception of Indian individuals. What is the asset value of a particular art form or asset of value of Business Standard as a newspaper? That's a question of individual assumptions. So that will survive in years to come.
Do you see any global regulatory framework coming?
There is a need for, during India's G20, both the IMF and the Bank for International Settlement worked on. There is all these areas. See, AI has a lot of positives, but the assumptions behind your algorithms, whether they're good for humanity, has a lot to be questioned for. And therefore, no individual country can do this. You need global rules, you need global negotiations, you need global norms for crypto, for AI. All this is a function of global norms. And how do you use it for the good of humanity?